Hello and good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, everyone, wherever you are. I'm Umberto, CEO of Follow the Camino, and we are live streaming today with our guest, Alberto Ferreiro. We are very lucky, who is a history professor at Seattle Pacific University. Good morning, Alberto. What time is it where you are?
11 a.m.
All right.
It's almost noon.
Brilliant. Um, so, for this live streaming, we're going to have a conversation with Alberto, who has a huge amount of experience in pilgrimages, the Camino, and Santiago and other places. But maybe I will let him start by introducing himself and tell us a bit more about him and his knowledge, and you can tell it to the audience. And before we start, for the audience, please feel free to put comments and questions. We receive these live, and we can ask them to Alberto directly, who can answer them live. All right. So, Alberto, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself and tell us what brought us to pilgrimages and the Camino.
Okay. First of all, my title, history professor, as of July of last year, I became emeritus professor. I taught at Seattle Pacific for 36 years in the history department in the topics on the Middle Ages, the Crusades, late Roman Empire, Western spirituality, and related topics. But I continue, of course, to be active in my research and in travel. I go to Europe very often, fortunately. And after the COVID lockdowns, I have resumed my travels to Europe, mostly to Spain, by the way, and into Portugal. Um, my involvement with pilgrimages, I guess it comes from a lot of different avenues, in part from teaching the Middle Ages, since pilgrimages became such a prominent phenomena, and also teaching early Christianity, one of the courses I taught, where we find the emergence of pilgrimages even as early as the first and second centuries, and then my going to Spain often and having gone to Santiago de Compostela, as I mentioned with our friends here, at least 5 or 6 times, but never having walked El Camino. I've never walked El Camino. I was always busy with other things in the summer. I had a program in Salamanca for 30 years in the summer with students, and so I did not have the time to break free to do something like that. But it piqued my interest. I said I've visited many times. I've published on it. I've published on the origins of the cult of Santiago de Compostela and related cults of Saint Martin of Tours, especially. That's very much tied in with the whole cult of Santiago that a lot of people don't know, by the way, that Santiago is very much vinculated with Martin of Tours. That's an interesting story in and of itself. And lastly, I myself organize pilgrimages. I've organized 7 Carmelite pilgrimages titled "In the Footsteps of Teresa and John of the Cross," where we spend 2 weeks in Castilla León, staying in the monasteries that Teresa and San Juan de la Cruz founded. The last one was just this September. So in that sense, I have walked, if you will, but we don't walk in those. We go on a coach. These are older people,
Yes.
and they're not going to go around with backpacks and all that kind of stuff. And so I have all these different levels and different types of experiences with El Camino, and have attended conferences related to El Camino. One in particular in Zamora, which was on the Via de la Plata, which is El Camino from Sevilla, going up through Salamanca, through Extremadura, and then up to Astorga, take a left, and then you go to Santiago de Compostela. that conference was dedicated to that particular camino. So, I mean, that in a nutshell is how I got involved and continue to be involved in these particular topics. Um, and the last conference I attended, big ones, was in 2016. It was the 1700th anniversary of the birth of St. Martin of Tours. And so they had a big conference in Orense in 2016. Martin is the patron saint of Orense, and one in Tours in France, as you might expect. And I was invited to both venues. And there I spoke on the question, at least for the one in Orense, I spoke on the question, when was the first church dedicated to Martin of Tours founded and where in the Iberian Peninsula?
Mm-hmm.
It's the background to the coming cult of Santiago de Compostela. It's the background you need to understand where Santiago then comes into the picture a couple of centuries later, about 2 centuries later. Martin of Tours was there first, and then
Okay.
So anyway,
that's very interesting and huge amount of experience, I suppose. And actually, even myself, like before, I got to do a bit of research and check the things that you had done. It is funny how the Camino is central, and for some people it's the beginning. But as you say, there are things before. If you don't mind, could you tell us a bit about the history of the Camino or pilgrimages, if it starts earlier with San Martin of Tours, to put the Camino, which for us at Follow the Camino we concentrate on, just that we have an idea of where it comes into the, I don't know, this timeline, I suppose.
Well, we know that very early on, by early I mean second, third, fourth centuries, there's already a lot of devotion to local saints, local martyrs, most of these being martyrs from the Roman Empire. One thing that the Romans were very generous about is giving Christianity lots of martyrs, okay? Mm-hmm. So these martyrs, their places of burial become places of pilgrimage, but in a localized way. But some of them break out from the local confinements of an area. Like I'm thinking, for example, of a woman named Eulalia of Mérida. Eulalia of Mérida was martyred there in that region in the 4th century, but her cult extended very, very rapidly throughout the Iberian Peninsula, so that you find many chapels and many churches and many shrines and hermitages dedicated to her. Okay, but the majority stayed local. So what did Galicia look like? Galicia looked pretty much like anywhere else. We have a lot of local devotion to local saints, people, martyrs especially, and confessors being commemorated on the day in the calendar, liturgical calendar, that they died. Where there would be a celebration, there'd be a special mass, a special liturgy, and of course then food and festivity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And so that was already there. We know that. But the big superstar that enters into Galicia, that reaches what I used to tell my students, rock star status in early Christianity, is Martin of Tours. Martin of Tours, I'll show whoever's watching. Here he is on horseback. Okay, this is a votive candle, Martín Caballero in Spanish. You get this in the grocery stores in the United States in the Mexican food section. And you see a beggar, he's begging, and Martin of Tours is sharing his cape with him. This is the most famous story of Martin of Tours. He was a Roman soldier stationed in Lyon in southern France. And every day he and his friends would go out on patrols. Yes. And there was a beggar always there at the gate begging. They just ignored him, sometimes made comments to him, bad comments, but usually just ignored him. And one winter when they were going out, it was snowing, it was very cold. This poor beggar's there begging. And all of a sudden, Martin feels this compassion for him. So he takes off his cape and cuts it in half and gives him the half of the cape and goes off. And his friends, his companions, make fun of him. They say, "You're stupid. Why did you give that worthless dog, or this worthless man who's even more worthless than a dog, your favorite cape?" And he said, "I don't know." So that night he goes to bed, and he's thinking about what he did. Why did I do that? Why did I have compassion for this guy? And he goes to sleep. Okay, and the story goes on to say that in a dream, this beggar appears to him, and the beggar says, "You didn't tell me your name." And Martin says, "Well, my name is Martin." And then Martin asks the beggar, says, "And what is your name?" And he says, "My name is Jesus." And all of a sudden, his rags disappear, and Christ is in his presence. And of course, he realizes he had shared his cape with Christ. So the story goes on. He converts to Christianity. He leaves the Roman legions. He trades in his sword of the Roman military for the sword of the Spirit, becomes a great missionary. Okay, founding monasteries and converting people by the thousands, becomes the patron saint of France, which he still is today. And upon his death, many miracles began to be reported at his tomb in Tours, okay, which is just south of Paris. And that cult began to spread very rapidly in France, and then apparently spread into Galicia in the 6th century. Okay, 2 centuries later, after he died around 397. But his cult began to spread into Galicia, or into Spain, but mainly Galicia, in the 6th century, in the middle of the 6th century, 540s, 550s. We don't have precise dates for this. And apparently, we know that there were diplomatic contacts between the rulers of Galicia at that time, a Germanic tribe called the Sueves, and the rulers of what is called Merovingian France. And so there were contacts, and apparently they had heard of Martin of Tours and all the miracles at his tomb. And one of these kings, his son, became ill to the point of death. And so he dispatches some of his men and says, "Go get a miracle from this guy." And they gave him a piece of cloth, and said, "Take it to his tomb and invoke Martin, and then come back and bring the cloth back, and we'll put it on my son and see if he convert and see for his healing." Well, they do that, and the son is not healed. And the king is told in a vision, in a dream, "So you're a heretic. You have to convert first."
Okay.
Okay, I get the picture now. So they go back again and do it again. They come back, and the son is healed, and of course, the son is healed. Disease disappears. Blah 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 blah. And then he orders the construction of a church in honor of Martin of Tours there in Galicia, in what is now Braga in Portugal.
Okay.
Braga Augusta.
Interesting.
In Braga. That was part of the kingdom at the time.
Yeah.
And that was Greater Galicia, or Galicia. And they built the church there in his honor. They put the relic in there. They brought a relic back of St. Martin of Tours. And so that's where the cult of St. Martin of Tours starts. And it slowly spreads over time. And another Martin of Braga, became the great promoter of his namesake, Martin of Tours, in the region of Galicia. Both Martins, Martin of Tours and Martin of Braga, who were separated by 200 years, okay, they were both from the same region, the province of Pannonia, which is now Serbia in Hungary.
Okay.
They both migrated west as missionaries. One ends up in France, Martin of Tours, and the other one ends up in Galicia, Martin of Braga. And Martin of Braga becomes a great promoter of his cult, of Martin of Tours' cult. So that cult was already really prominent in Galicia 2 centuries before the whole business of the Santiago emerges. See?
And that's very interesting. Like I'm trying to see, from my perspective, my understanding was that at least when St. James' remains are found in 820, more or less, in Padron, uh, that the Moors were in control of the whole peninsula and up to France, almost near true actually, and that somehow the remains are found around that time, and it's the start as well of the Reconquista. So I'm trying to see what would have been the situation then from San Martin of Tours and Braga and this uh, pilgrimage and this worship
Mhm.
going through to St. James and then later on the pilgrimage to St. James. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Well, as you know, the emergence of the cult of Santiago is couched in a great deal of legend. The Codex Calixtinus, which is the main text, dates to the 12th century. You have one copy in France, and then you have the other great copy in the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela, uh, which is the main one that a lot of scholars use. But it's a very late date. It's not. It wasn't written in the fourth or fifth or sixth centuries.
Sure.
These are legends that are added later, and so forth. You have a lot of oral traditions to explain how supposedly the body of St. James, one of the 12 apostles,
Yeah, yeah.
brother of John, the sons of thunder, the sons of Zebedee, also called the sons of thunder in the New Testament. First apostle to becomes a martyr. In the Acts of the Apostles, he's beheaded. Okay, so there you
Mm-hmm.
have the headless body. Okay, and so the question became, I guess, how does the body get from Jerusalem all the way to Santiago to Galicia? Okay, but in the interim, you have some legends pop up. That James or Santiago, before he was martyred in Jerusalem, and that much is fact, that supposedly he went to Spain and
Mm-hmm.
preached in the region of Saragossa and so forth. This is purely legend. There's just absolutely no
Okay.
evidence of that anywhere. It's based on a vision and so forth.
Okay.
There's no archaeology, there's no early medieval texts that can attest to that, and so on. And no early Christian text, by the way, places Santiago in Galicia.
Okay.
When you look at
Interesting.
the early Christian texts where they talk about what happened to the 12 apostles,
Ah.
Peter was crucified upside down. Andrew was crucified on an X cross, and Philip, and it just goes down the line how they were killed, with the exception of John, who dies in exile. In the island of Patmos, James is never. It said he's beheaded in Jerusalem,
Mm-hmm.
but he's never described as having gone to Spain and preaching and trying to get introducing Christianity into the region. Nor do they talk about the body being translated to the Iberian Peninsula. That is much, much later. But nevertheless, the important thing is people believed it. Okay,
Uh-huh.
the important thing is people believed it, and there was no reason why they shouldn't believe it. Okay, and you know the story that the body was discovered in a field with a star
Right.
shining in the field, where we get Compostela. Compo comes from the Latin word
La.
campo, campus, where we drive campus or a field, and
Yes.
stella is a star. So it's the field of the star, kind of like a Christmassy story, Christmas-like
Okay.
story. Okay, and so they discover the body, and the local bishop, of course, gets involved, and he testifies that they asked him, "Is this really the body of Saint James?" He said, "Yeah, sure, it's at Saint James." Well, if the bishop says so, well, the bishop says so. And back then they didn't have DNA, they didn't have
Yeah, yeah,
forensic
yeah.
evidence, they didn't demand the proof that we would demand. Okay, and so they do establish a shrine there, so a small shrine, and then we get into the historical part of it with Alfonso II of Asturias. Alfonso II builds the first church or small church shrine to Santiago, but it's interesting, he builds it in Galicia, not in Asturias. He
Yes.
could have
That's true.
easily brought the relics to Asturias and built the church there in Oviedo, what is now Oviedo, for example, but he didn't. And of course, then the word got around that the apostle had been discovered, et cetera, et cetera. Charlemagne, the famous Charlemagne up in
Yes.
the north, he wants the relics of Santiago, or at least some of them. Okay, and Alfonso says, no, you can't have any of them. Okay, because Charlemagne collected relics, kind of like collecting, like collecting stamps, or. But in this case, the
Yes.
more saints you have, the more power you have behind you when you go to battle, when you go to
More
war.
godly links you get.
Yeah, he had more connections with God, so to speak. And but Alfonso said, no, you can't have a relic. So he builds a shrine in what is now Galicia. After Alfonso, then we are on pretty good historical documentation and historical grounds. But before that, in terms of how the body got there, that an angel guided the boat, through the
Yeah.
Mediterranean, all of that, of course, is embellished legend.
And
Now, here's another aspect of this that you may not have heard of, and if anybody's listening in on this may not have heard of. There was a
and
famous preacher in Galicia named Priscillian, who was Bishop of Avila, but became a very famous preacher in Galicia. Priscillian, they call him Priscillian of Avila, had a huge following. He was kind of like a monastic, wandering monk type. He had an entourage of women and men. They lived an ascetic life. They walked barefoot and, they had a very strict diet, early monastic type life. Well, it's a long story, but to make it short and palatable, I've published a lot on this fellow. He was killed. He ended up being officially condemned as a heretic and was beheaded along with his companions in Germany, in Trier.
okay.
He tried to get an audience with the Pope to clear his name. Okay. He wasn't a heretic, by the way. And he got caught up in the politics of the church and the politics of power grabs and all this kind of stuff. And but his body was repatriated back to Galicia. We know that for sure. Amidst
Okay.
great pomp, when his body arrived in Galicia, in what is now the area of Santiago, they had a huge procession in his honor. He was received as a martyr. Okay, he even appeared in the liturgical calendar for a while as a martyr,
Hmm.
and there was a shrine there that people would go to
A,
venerate him.
a different shrine than the one of
No,
Saint
Santiago's
James.
not around yet.
Uh-huh,
This
uh-huh.
is before Santiago. This is in the 4th century. Okay,
Okay.
and then we enter a dark period that we don't know what happened, but the cult to Priscillian was suppressed. Okay, was completely suppressed. He was removed from the liturgical calendar, et cetera, et cetera. And then all of a sudden, the cult of St. James comes up. They find a headless body. Well, Priscillian was headless too. And there are some scholars that propose, and I'm more and more convinced in that direction, that the original person buried there was Priscillian, and that the church transformed it into St. James the Apostle for
Okay.
a wide variety of reasons. So maybe when you go to Santiago and go look at the tomb of St. James under the altar, that body in there could very likely be Priscillian. We know for sure it's not James. He
Yeah.
was never there. So
Okay. Interesting. I'm not sure. It's that you were saying that people believed that the body found in the field was the remains of Saint James the Apostle. Um, but for this to be believed by believers, it also means that somehow uh, the leaders, either church or political leaders or rulers, also wanted them to believe, I suppose. Like it almost sounds to me like politics, where did Alfonso II not create that church and shrine, church cathedral there, also to attract people down there? I mean,
I
what's the
don't know if he
reason?
did it. I don't know if he did it for that reason. I'm not going to be cynical and just believe that he did it for monetary or political reasons or whatever.
Uh-huh.
I'll just assume he's a believer.
Yeah,
The bishop has said it's Santiago, so it's Santiago. So I'm going to honor the apostle. I'm going to build him a shrine, et cetera, et cetera. And the rest takes care of itself. You know,
Mm,
pilgrimages had a very important transforming power in society. Little towns, in some cases, became big cities
true.
because of the pilgrim traffic. And some people would, for example, go to a pilgrim site as pilgrims and then just stay there. They liked it. Oh, this is nice. The weather's nice.
Yeah.
The food is nice. Home is too far away. I don't want to walk all the way back. It's not like today where people do the 2,000 kilometers to Santiago, but then they get on a plane and go back.
Right.
Back then, you had to walk back. So many people just simply did not walk back. They just, I'll just stay here. I'm tired. Okay.
And most people actually do a lot less
Yeah.
than the thousand or
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
amount of kilometers. I've got a couple of questions that were being asked on social media. Um, when did people start to walk the Camino uh, in general, and then after that with a religious motivation? I don't know if you could how the pilgrimage became from
I'm looking at the
religion to belief.
questions now. Why is the Cathedral of Santiago and not in
So
Padron? I don't know the specific answer to that question. Why is it in Santiago and not in Padron? Uh, the only part that I know is that the initial shrine was in what is now Santiago de Compostela. And so there
yes,
probably was felt there wasn't a need to move it somewhere else, although Padron has some great peppers, pimientos
true.
en Padron. I love those things. But I would have to see to specialists. You could ask somebody that question at the Instituto de Estudios Gallegos. There's some people there, I think, who would have more specific information, if there's even an answer
Uh,
to the question.
yeah. A
Yeah,
firm answer backed up by some
yeah. Why
scientific
not
facts. And
Orense? Why not? Excuse me. Why not Oviedo? Why didn't Alfonso II just simply
yeah.
take the relics and build a shrine there in his kingdom? Because Galicia was not part of his kingdom. So something
True,
did
true.
happen to make him leave them there. Okay.
Uh,
The other question was, when did people start to walk the Camino without a religious motivation? Well, that's a tough one. Trying to get into the hearts and minds of people. I remember the first time I went to Santiago, I went to the pilgrims reception, where people take those passports and they
the
get the
pilgrim
official
office.
last seal, then they get the, I don't know if they still give this out anymore. I know they give a
Oh,
paper
it's sold
certificate.
on in lots of shops along the way, I suppose.
Okay, but they
Uh,
used to give these in the pilgrims reception.
uh-huh.
This was years ago. I know
Yeah.
this because three of my students who were thinking of going on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, they came to see me and I said, why do you want to go to the Holy Land? It's hot. It's full of flies. There's always tensions there between the Palestinians and the Israelis. It can be dangerous, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I said, why don't you go to Santiago de Compostela? And they didn't know anything about Santiago.
Uh-huh.
So I gave them a short mini explanation about Santiago, and all three of them took off. Okay, they did El
Yeah.
Camino. They went from, I don't think they started in Puente La Reina, but somewhere in that vicinity, the three of them walked all the way to Santiago. So months
Yes.
later, after they got back, one of them, Joshua, came to see me. And we had lunch together because I had a lot of questions. And he said, oh, by the way, I brought you this. I said, oh, right. This is great. This is the priest who runs the reception in Santiago told me to give it to you as a token because you talked us into going on this pilgrimage.
Right. Very
So
good.
in proxy, I walked it. Okay.
Yes,
So
yes. But
anyway, so their motivation, if you look in the Pilgrim's book, as I did, because I asked the
yeah.
priest there, he said, why do people do this? He says, well, look in the book. They put a brief explanation why do this. And I started leafing through it. The majority were for religious reasons. Others were the adventure. It's beautiful, or I'm having a crisis in my life.
Yeah.
I need to get my life together. I've got these issues that I need to deal with, et cetera, et cetera. I would have to think if you've ever read Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, even though it's a comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, those pilgrims in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales are a slice of different motives why people are
Sure.
going on the pilgrimage. At least in that case, the Canterbury. I would think that even from the very beginning, that it was not always for religious reasons. And what do we mean by religious reasons, anyways? A personal conversion, someone who's committed a grave crime, do it as a penance for a crime committed.
Yes.
Someone who's is tending towards atheism and they want to recover the faith, or who knows what that is. But I would have to believe, knowing human nature, that people even back then participated in this camino for all kinds of reasons, but overwhelmingly religious, as you still find
Yes. Yes.
today.
Yes.
As you still
Uh,
find today. If you go look through that book, it's mainly or looking for a healing for a loved one, someone back
okay.
home who's got cancer, and you're going to do the El Camino for them in proxy, asking the Santiago and asking God to intervene and hopefully heal that person.
So I suppose the whole, at least on the Camino, you can tell us about other pilgrimages that might be different, but on the Camino, people um, pursued this journey. As you said, you had to walk all the way down to Santiago,
Mhm.
if not Muxia or Finisterre, and the way back as well. So the church did put or did give the plenary indulgence for those completing this pilgrimage,
Mhm.
also to attract, I suppose, people. It was a give take type of situation.
Mhm.
Some other maybe to seek themselves. Uh, so a lot of people have a direct interest in doing that. So it's less the adventure, at least historically, than it would be now. What we have found ourselves, and the statistic at the cathedral say that more and more people do it for not they don't mention religion, but they mention spirituality.
Spirituality, yeah.
So basically, that question mark whether it's uh, Christian or whatever, people who don't know or don't identify to any
Mhm.
specific one.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, is this specific to the pilgrimage to Santiago, or is it similar to other pilgrimages around the world, whether it's to the Holy Land or Lourdes in France or Braga, Fatima? Uh,
Oh,
what would
yeah.
be
It's,
some
I think, yeah.
similarities? Because, for example, the Camino is unique in this pilgrimaging walk and journey. We, at least as a travel agent, we don't see that in Fatima. People, they take the bus, they go to Fatima, they spend 2 days, they go around
Mhm.
and they go. So there are some different traditions
Yeah,
for different pilgrimages. So they're
exactly.
specific and they haven't tried to blend or to copy each other. They keep their specificity. Could you
Yeah,
tell us a bit about that?
each pilgrimage has its own uniqueness about it. So you mentioned Fatima is not the same as El Camino. Lourdes is not the same as El Camino, or going to the Holy Land. If you want to cast the net wider, Muslims doing the Hajj to
Hmm.
Mecca is a very different experience for them than someone that going as a pilgrim to Rome, let's say in a Jubilee year. And even though the basic common denominator is that pilgrimages promote the idea that that there are places, physical places that one can travel to with the hope of having a special encounter, be it spiritual, okay, or religious, however you want to define it, whether it's the Buddhist experience or whether it's the Muslim experience or whether it's the Christian or Catholic or Protestant, even within the traditions experience. But the idea that there's a place that one goes to where they can have this special encounter with the unseen, call it God, call it the spiritual realm, whatever. Okay, and so that's a very strong belief. Um, and the motivations. Sometimes people have unexpected experiences. you know, I mean, there's all kinds of stories of people who start a Camino as, hard-nosed atheists, and at the end, they're on their knees in the cathedral, you know,
Yeah.
having a conversion. Okay, and then there are
Yes.
people who start the experience and they get to the Santiago and so forth. They've had a great experience, but there's no fireworks and there's no deep change of anything and so forth. They just have had a great experience. In the case of my three students, these young men were already believers, Protestant believers. Okay, but through the El Camino experience, all three of them became Catholic. That was the
Yes.
transformation they went through. Okay,
Yes.
for them, a guy that I knew in Belgium, a farmer that I
Uh-huh.
met, he walked from from Antwerp to Santiago with his donkey. He took a donkey with him.
Okay.
Yeah, and let his beard grow and his hair and so forth. He looked like Jesus actually, and he went all the way to Santiago with his donkey and had no aha moments, no epiphanies or anything. Just had a
Yes.
wonderful experience with his donkey. Of course, my question was, how did you get back? And
Uh-huh.
he said, well, I flew back. And I said, your donkey flew back with you? And he says, no, 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 no. I left the donkey. I found a farmer in Santiago and I
Okay.
gave him my donkey.
Yeah.
So,
And
and someone asked me, why do people continue their pilgrimage to Finisterra or Musia? Well, I guess you'd have to ask them personally, but why not? I guess we always like to see what's on the other side. We always like to see, sometimes when you have a main pilgrimage site, you will have nearby sites that become part of that whole experience. That once you get to the main site, you've got to go to this place as well. You've got to go to that place as well. And sometimes it's tied to the cult of another saint in the region. And so I suspect that's why people continue, and it's a beautiful area anyway. So there's that
yeah.
aspect as well, the
Uh, uh,
aesthetic part of it. That once you're there, why not explore the region more? But there's a lot more to see,
yeah.
as you know, in Galicia than just Santiago.
And I suppose even symbolically for them, they were going to the end of Earth or
Yeah,
of the land
yeah,
before
that was the
people
end
had
of the world
discovered the
for.
Americas
Yeah, they thought there was nothing land
beyond.
wise. That's why Europeans did not go out into the Atlantic and go west.
Uh-huh.
They knew that if you continued, eventually you would get to India and China, but they thought that it was so vast that that they didn't try it until we get to the 15th century with Columbus and the other explorers. Um, that's why Columbus thought he had stumbled upon India. No
Yes.
one knew that there were continents in the way. They were going the
Yes.
right way. They just didn't know that there was a Central, South, and North America in the way.
Yes. See what you
it's
mean.
Yeah, and so Columbus thought that Florida and all that area was China, and he thought that Cuba was India. So
Ah, well.
yeah, but why not? Why not visit the surrounding territories? And like I said, the cult of Santiago spawned other devotions to other local saints that were already there. Many of them were already there, as I mentioned. Many of these local martyrs and confessors, their cult was already there, and the cult of St. James, as it grew, gave them more visibility um, as the pilgrims began to pour in steadily, and it grew very fast. Did you know
Mm.
that by the 12th century, I was in Rome some years ago, and they had an exhibit there called Santiago, Roma, Roma, Santiago,
Uh-huh.
okay? About pilgrimage, of course. And I learned through that exhibit that in the 12th century, 12th, 13th century, more pilgrims were going to Santiago than were going to Rome. And Rome
Which
was
is
very upset about this.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So Rome started a publicity campaign
Okay.
telling faithful Catholics, you don't go to Santiago. They only have one apostle. say we have the two main apostles here. We have Paul and Peter here. And we have a whole bunch more here. You don't have to
Yeah.
go all the way to Santiago. So they got into a publicity war with each other. And of course, Rome in the end won out because eventually the road to the pilgrimage to Compostela began to decline. And that's another question. Why does it decline? So why does it decline? And then why does it resurface again? So, and we have the
And
answers.
now maybe I'll throw a couple of things that are, I'm not a researcher. I just have I'm just a keen, I have keen interest in this topic. But by looking at the statistics of the number of pilgrims to Santiago, at least, we can clearly see that from the early 2010, the increase, it's starting to increase again very much. And I myself link that to 9/11 and the attack of another religion onto a Christian country, and maybe shaking the Christian, saying, "Where is my faith? What do I do for my faith?" Now, I don't know what you think about that, but in I would see some sort of link to that. Um, I don't know.
There could be. I wanted to backtrack just a little bit. Why El Camino and other pilgrimages, and in some cases, some pilgrimage sites just disappeared altogether.
Altogether.
In Germany, for example, in the region of Bamberg, I've been there twice. I was just there in September
Mm-hmm.
at a symposium. There's a famous church outside of Bamberg dedicated to the 14 children martyrs.
Mm-hmm.
Supposedly, these people saw a vision of 14 children on that site. That these were children that were martyred during the Roman period, and they were instructed to build a church there in their honor and to make it a pilgrimage site, which they did. Okay, and so for centuries, thousands of Germans would converge on that site to venerate on their feast day and so on. They still have it today, but it's a much, much more reduced experience. And that feast
Yes.
day has been removed from the liturgical calendar. You know how they're always revising the liturgical
Yeah, yeah,
calendar?
yeah, yeah.
Well, that was one of the casualties because it was no longer that popular. But because of the Protestant Reformation, the Protestants rejected pilgrimages as superstitious, as money-making
Uh-huh.
enterprises and all that kind of stuff. And the Catholic Church did not deny that pilgrimages had become, the pilgrimage experience had become quite corrupt. The money, especially, the money had corrupted the whole thing.
I
So the
understand.
Catholic Church knew that pilgrimages needed to be reformed. It's get the money out of the picture and to begin to
Yeah.
repair it. But then on top of that, then you have the Enlightenment and you have the scientific revolution where you have a great deal of skepticism about miracles, skepticism about, divine intervention and people being healed and all this kind of stuff. And that didn't help a lot. And so less and less people began to go to these places as belief in the belief that you could go there and get a miracle and so forth, as belief in miracles declined dramatically, even within the Catholic Church, even within the
Yeah,
Catholic
yeah,
faithful. And bishops no longer promoting it. Well, it's a thing of the past. It served its purpose, et cetera, et cetera. So many of these lesser known pilgrimage sites just simply disappeared. I mean, the churches are
yes,
still
yes, yes.
there, but nobody went there anymore. And Santiago virtually went silent. Okay.
True.
But then in the 19th century, the 19th century is when you get Bernadette, Lourdes.
Yes.
And at the turn of the 20th century, you get Fatima, the three children in Portugal and so forth. And all of a sudden, these kinds of pilgrimage sites begin to resurge. In Spain, Santiago, there's a resurgence of the cult of St. James, not during the Spanish Civil War, not during World War II, because it was not safe to travel anywhere when the whole continent is at war, right?
True.
So, okay. For whatever it's worth, or whatever we may think, Francisco Franco, who was Gallego, he was from Galicia, he was from
From Ferrol.
from Ferrol. They used to call it El Ferrol del Caudillo, you know,
Uh-huh.
and he had great devotion to Santiago. Okay,
Uh,
and the feast day of Santiago became a national holiday in Spain.
yeah.
It's no longer a national holiday. Okay, it's now it's up to each province to decide how they're going to celebrate
Yes.
the day of Santiago. Most of them don't anymore, unfortunately. It used to be a big deal, you know, to buy the bread of Santiago, the tarta de Santiago, and the cheese and all that kind of stuff. In Santiago proper, they still celebrate it. So Santiago got a boost, if you will, from the dictator. Okay, from the
Yes.
dictatorship. Well, the dictatorship goes away. Okay, democracy comes to Spain and so forth. Things calm down, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not surprising in the 70s and 80s, you know, you start seeing a rehabilitation of El Camino, a rehabilitation, you know, with albergues and all this kind of, the rehabilitation, as you know, continues. This Instituto de Estudios Gallegos in Santiago, they're rehabilitating all kinds of different routes that have been
Yeah.
abandoned. You know, they're doing a lot of work in making it many other possibilities how to get to Santiago, and not just the central one,
Yeah.
La
Sure.
Ruta del Norte, as it is called. Okay. And so you get to what you were saying. I think you mentioned, what is it, 9/11 and all these kinds of events.
Yeah. It was just a thought. You know, it's maybe it's also linked to the fact that um, the generations had more holidays. Because
Yeah.
they had more holidays, they were more
Yeah.
into outdoor stuff. You know, the
The
so
environment.
walking
Yeah. Yeah.
environment. So all of these type of
And groups like
subject.
yours, and groups like yours, where you a lot of people want to do it, but how do I do it? And a group
Yeah,
like Follow the
yeah,
Camino
yeah.
can make it possible for them,
Yes,
which I found very
and
interesting and useful when I went into your website.
and and so how would you define quickly what is a pilgrimage with this its differences, whether it's a pilgrimage to Braga, the few places
Mhm.
we've mentioned, or anywhere? We know that they are different and they have their own thing. So how would you define a pilgrimage, and how they vary
Well,
in?
pilgrimage is an experience. It's an experience to go to travel to a place. It has to be a place. It can be a sacred mountain. It can be a sacred river. It doesn't have to be a building, but it's usually a building.
Sure.
Call it a cathedral, call it a monastery, call it a mosque, call it a Buddhist temple, whatever. But not just any Buddhist temple and so forth, but the really grand pilgrimage sites are holy sites of enormous prominence. You know, for example, the
Uh,
Muslims have many places where they can go on pilgrimage, but Mecca is the big one, right?
yeah,
Okay, and for Christians, especially for Catholics, you know, it's Jerusalem, it's Rome,
yeah,
Santiago. Those are the big three right now. You know, Canterbury's making a comeback, by the way, slowly, but it'll never reach the ranks of those three. And so it's going to a place, a physical place, where you are seeking for a special encounter. Call it spiritual, call it religious, whatever label you want to put on it, where you believe that you're going to have this special encounter with the other. Okay, and where you're doing this pilgrimage also, not only for yourself, but also in proxy for others, maybe for world
true.
peace, maybe for, again, the family member or a friend that's going through a very difficult time psychologically or mentally or both, et cetera, et cetera. That's why I used to tell my students, and distance doesn't have, it's not relevant here. It can be 2,000 kilometers, it can be 200 kilometers, it can be 20 kilometers,
Ooh,
it can be 20 feet down the street.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But a pilgrimage doesn't necessarily need to have difficulty or challenge. I'm just saying that because, for example, in Fatima, the tradition is to go around
On
the
your knees.
church on knees, which
I
is
can't do that.
something challenging. You know,
I
the
can't do
the
that. There's
the
no
the,
way.
the, the, the Camino is walking, so somehow there is a an idea that there has to be some sense of sacrifice. Is that true to all pilgrimages? Most pilgrimages?
I can't speak for the Hajj, but I know, given that Mecca is out in the middle of nowhere in the desert,
Yeah.
people have to fly there. They now have a high-speed train that the Spanish built between Medina and Mecca. They do a lot of fasting, of course. They do a lot of
Yes.
self-sacrifice in that sense. I think the purists, if you want to call them that, I think purists would say is you have to suffer. You
Yeah. Yeah.
have
Yeah.
to be a real purist. You have to suffer. That is supposed to reflect the suffering of life and so forth. Others would say, well, okay, yeah, of course it should be uncomfortable, but you shouldn't go out of your way to make it uncomfortable.
Yeah.
What's wrong with walking part of the way and
Yeah.
riding in a car part of the way and then
Uh,
walking part of the way? What if
uh,
physically you can't walk the whole thing, but you want to do the camino? If you
Alberto,
can't walk it, does that mean you can't do it at all?
we get this often whereby obviously we organize the pilgrimage for people, and you're walking with the group, and they're like, oh well, you don't need to book, and you can stay in albergue, it's less comfortable, or you get your bags carried, and you're like, it's not the real pilgrimage. Say, hold on a second. If you were traveling 300 or 500 years ago, you didn't have these nice synthetic backpacks that you now have with the belt that share the weight. You didn't have these nice shoes you're wearing. So there's only, I suppose, for us, the way we see it is that everybody has to find their own level of pain that they are
Exactly.
satisfied with,
I
whatever
agree
that
with that.
is. It's
I agree with that.
otherwise it goes to crazy stuff. So uh, and maybe um, yeah, and so I know you've been to Santiago a good few times, 4 or 5 times, and we might try to I know we are not tight with time, but we're going to try to finish in the next few minutes. What would be for those that are interested in pilgrimages, what would you recommend them to think about, or to see, or to go to see either Camino type of pilgrimages, or other, to open up to other uh, destination ways of seeing pilgrimages?
Now, it's what to read or what to consult before you
Either
do it.
to read or other destination. You were talking about Saint Martin of Tours in France. I'm like, if people go there, what sort of experience can they get, or Rome? Obviously on the Camino, you're walking a week, you're going to Santiago. So the week walking is the experience. Then you get to
Mhm.
Santiago, you stay a couple of days, and that's that usually. Or you can walk for a month. Uh, but how would somebody see a pilgrimage to San Martin of Tours or Braga, for example? Is it a different approach? I don't know.
Well, I think I, I'm not aware that there are pilgrimages to Braga where you walk from somewhere to Braga. I've been to Braga several times
Yeah,
and have gone to the cathedral and so forth, where Martin of Braga is buried, by the way. His tomb is there. Um, there are pilgrimages. There are also urban pilgrimages
mm,
that are popping up now. For example, I was in Zamora, in which is just northeast of Salamanca. In fact, it's in the Via de la Plata
yes.
on the way to Santiago. But Zamora is a nice little town, and they've put together a Romanesque route. They give you this little map, and you visit all the Romanesque churches, the main Romanesque churches, one by one, and the final stop is the cathedral, and each one of them has an explanation. I suppose you
Yeah,
could do that as a pilgrimage
sure.
uh, within an urban setting, for example. Uh, the one in Tours, that on his feast day, there's a lot of celebration there in Tours. It's a beautiful church
Yeah.
that they rebuilt for in honor of their patron saint. But but in terms of walking and all this kind of stuff, Santiago is unique in that way,
Okay.
where you have these long distances to walk, and And I think we have to become more creative to allow more people to, in quotation marks, walk it. Just because you
Yes.
can't walk 200 kilometers, that should not exclude you from some kind of experience.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
have to make accommodations. Like you said, back in the Middle Ages, they didn't have the backpacks. They didn't have also the albergues.
no,
You know, they had some, but they had very few albergues for you to sleep in. It wasn't,
yeah,
it's not anything like it is now. Um, I think we have to be more flexible. But I've met people that are they're they're the purists. You have to suffer. You have to sweat.
yeah,
Your feet
yeah,
have to
true.
hurt. And you have to get blisters and so I said, oh, okay. Well, that's not going to encourage me to do it.
Do, and that maybe I don't know what you would think about that as a last comment or thought, but sometimes we talk to people and see the pilgrimage to Santiago, especially because there's the walk, as also a metaphor for life,
Hmm.
where there are some shiny days, there are some rainy
Yeah,
days,
that's a
there
very
are
important
some.
metaphor. Yeah, that it mirrors life. That you have the good times, you have the bad times, you have the times when you hurt, the times when you're happy, when you're sad, etc. Yeah, and it should reflect that. It should, and it does reflect that. It's a metaphor of life. You see that kind of spirituality in the Middle Ages when
Uh,
people talk about the pilgrimage of life,
yes,
reflected in the pilgrimage of going to whatever site uh, you're going to. Now,
and
if anyone wants any of if anybody wants any of my publications, I have them in PDFs. I mean, related to this kind of stuff. I have a few of them. I wrote one especially on the origins. It was called The Cult of Saints in Galicia Before Santiago. That was published some years back.
uh-huh.
And I have no problem sharing it with people.
So
I've got it
what
on
we can do maybe
PDFs.
after, we can put in the comments the links, and we might try to collate this and put that on a page, or maybe you have a website and we can share the link, or we can put that on our own and share them if you want, so that we can share that.
Whichever way you want it, I'm willing to share my stuff.
Yeah, yeah. No,
And I don't
that's
charge
great, and
anything.
that's very generous of you. And
It's all
and I
free.
don't know. Uh, uh, to finish off, Alberto, I don't know if you have any last thought, or what's your next pilgrimage, or your next work that uh, you're working on, or what's the thing that is keeping you busy and excited.
Well, I also write and publish on the Catalan sermons of Vincent Ferrer, who's late
Okay.
15th century, and I will be attending a meeting in Utrecht in June. His sermon on predestination. I work on that, and I'm also got some other uh, projects regarding church councils in the
Uh-huh.
pre-Islamic Spain and Visigothic Spain. Some of the church councils that I've published on already, but continue to write about. I'm hoping to do another Carmelite pilgrimage in September.
Yeah, yeah,
I've sent out the information to try to get people to sign up, but it's the holidays, and right now people are too
yeah.
too busy with the
Busy.
holiday stuff. So we'll see if it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But I'm trying to organize the 7th. Like I said, it's a 2-week experience in Castilla Leon, right in the central part of Spain. So I'm working on that as well. So
If you,
yeah, when you're when
and
you're emeritus, the key thing is to stay busy.
yes, all
Stay
right.
busy. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
well, look, we'll if you have some documentation or some link to your trip, and we can help you promote it, we can share it as well. That would be great if you can bring more
Yeah.
people. Um, but uh, that's brilliant. I We had a lovely chat. It was brilliant having this chat before Christmas. Thanks very much for your time
It's been
and
my honor.
for
It's my honor.
sharing this information. So thank you, Alberto. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
And if
And
you need
to
a if you need us if you need a specific talk on a specific topic that I would have competency and I wouldn't mind giving it to your group. I
brilliant.
know right now everybody's busy with the holidays and
Yes,
maybe in a more calmer time.
Yes.
There's a lot of things that I could share.
That's great. Thank you very much for sharing, Alberto. And
Thank you.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye bye.